And that is why we too need to move on here in St. Kitts Nevis. And as a responsible legislator, we introduced this bill in the National Assembly on September 8th, 2023, to keep our laws in tune with the evolving needs and perspectives of our society. The Medicinal Amendment Bill 2023 reflects our commitment to responsible and responsive governance. Madam Speaker, can you imagine? I'm talking about an industry that billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars. And we here in St. Kitts and Nevis had some of the best growers in the world. Let me say what happened with respect to this, Madam Speaker. And I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think I need to put something in perspective. While we were here in the Caribbean locking up our master growers, you had countries like the United States that gave this plant to specific university to study as to how this plant could be used and the essence of this plant. Those universities have now mastered how to grow cannabis. And now that the industry is opening up, they are now the leading institutions when it comes to medicinal cannabis on the international economic scene. While we lock up our master growers here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Madam Speaker, if you have any master grower lock up, they need to consider letting go the master grower. Why? Because this type of knowledge that they would have gained for centuries passing down from our own people, that type of knowledge sometimes is not found in any books. That is why they put the university to study to see if they can get that knowledge and put it in books so that they can really lead the industry. A lot of them have the knowledge here in their head and in their practice. And we need to get it out their heads and let them really teach us how to master the growing of this plant here in the Caribbean. Madam Speaker, why I'm so enthusiastic about it? It is because we have good sunshine, we have volcanic soil, we have rain falling in our rainforest, even though there has been a drastic cut. And therefore, it means that we can develop to some extent our own land here in St. Kitts and Nevis instead of having to order. And on top of that, there are properties that can treat a number of illnesses that our people suffer from, including mental health. I'm sure all of us in here would have seen Dr. Gupta when Dr. Gupta had a series called Weed. I think he's probably up to Weed 4. I'm not sure, but it's possible he's up to Weed 4. And in that, there was a child who suffered from intractable seizures, epilepsy, that there was no medicine within the medical world that could have effectively treated the severity of that illness that that child had. And they resorted to cannabis, a specific strain that had a tremendous positive impact on the child's health. Madam Speaker, again demonstrating that this plant, of course, is not a poison, but can be used really to help our people. Madam Speaker, cannabis can also be used to treat certain cancers. And sometimes some people say, why not extract this part and that part? It doesn't work like that, Madam Speaker, from the research that have been shown. For example, you might say, okay, this is the active ingredient. Yes, this is the most active ingredient. But around that active ingredient are many more substances that really interact and interplay to make sure that the active ingredient acts in the way that it should act. And if you take the active ingredient out and leave all the other substances behind, you may not get the full potential or the positive potential from the active ingredient in a different environment. And that is why, to a great extent, you want it in its wholesome form. And therefore, this too is necessary. And how do you get the wholesome form? The plant. And when I was in St. Vincent, you see people growing and, they're telling me about this plant and that plant. And I acted like I never see the plant before. Learning from there. And the female plant and the male plant. And what is the buds and when the, and all those kind of things. For medical research. So I'm just simply saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that what they were saying is knowledge that our people have for decades, if not centuries, around here. And we need to extract it in order for us to develop the type of industry that we want to develop. So I want to basically close, Madam Speaker, by saying that it is about time. It has always been, in my estimation, to put this as a poison, really for other purposes except being based on scientific ground, back in 1938 was a significant error. And we want to correct it now in modern times with not just from a religious perspective or spiritual perspective, but even from a scientific perspective, and say once and for all that cannabis should not be designated as a poison.
Neither Schedule 1 drug.
Medicinal effects from all that
so you all need to make that argument as well.
I will not dare say that they are not issues that can be had. Just like anything else, Madam Speaker. Just like anything else. I remember growing up, and I would tell you, and I grew up in St. Peter's and Upper Monkey, and where I grew up. And there was always said to me that there has to be a great deal of responsibility when it comes to this. So I still encourage responsible use, Madam Speaker. I want to encourage that. And you don't want children trying to get access to it and abuse it and misuse it. Just like you don't want them to do any other substance. Something good, if not used appropriately, can have some effects that you don't want. I have to acknowledge that as well, Madam Speaker. So for its good use, for its spiritual use, for its medicinal use, we want to make sure that we harness all of that. But we want to say as well that we have to be responsible. We have to be responsible. And therefore encourage the responsible use when it comes to cannabis. And so, Madam Speaker, I thank you. Dear leave, I take my seat.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Christopher 8. Seconder. I recognize the Honourable Senator Iselin Philip.
Madam Deputy, I rise to second the mover of the bill and offer my support with this amendment, this medical amendment bill that's come before this Honourable House. I will reiterate the points that the Honourable Member from number 8 made, but just to not belabor it too much, I want to add that I believe, us coming to this house and being able to make this amendment, which essentially removes cannabis as a substance that is considered and deemed poisonous from our medical legislation, it demonstrates a level of growth and maturity when it comes to our legislative process, because I think we are now at a point in time where we would have heard, the PM would have mentioned, this was enacted initially in 1938, where it perhaps was thought or considered that cannabis was a poisonous substance, albeit I don't know what data or information they would have had at that time to believe so. But, we are now in 2023. And we know that, based on the amount of research and information that has been done and the use of this substance over time, that we know, in fact, that cannabis is a plant, natural plant, that is not poisonous. And so I think the fact that we can come to this honorable house and recognize that we have legislation, I'm sure there may be others, that carries certain attitudes and would have codified certain things about, substances that we use, or about certain practices that are not, in fact, the case, that we can come here to this house and have the courage as a government to make those changes, albeit there may be some, disagreement or backlash in certain instances. But I would want to echo and support what the Honourable Mover, Prime Minister, would have expressed in terms of, the fact that cannabis is a substance that clearly has some benefits in terms of, the way we're looking at it for medical purposes. And, while it is a psychoactive substance, similar to alcohol and other drugs, not based on my knowledge and what I know, there has never been a situation a case that I've heard reported of anyone dying of an overdose of cannabis use. And so, I would add to, the list of medicines that the PM would have mentioned. We know that opioids is actually a form of, pharmaceutical drug that is recommended by a lot of doctors, whereas, that could be considered more poisonous than cannabis, given it particularly in light of the fact that we are seeing an opioid crisis in a lot of North American jurisdictions. And so I think, for us to be able to come to this house and have the maturity to say, well, under whatever circumstances at that time where cannabis was designated as a poison, we are now here to correct that, especially based on the plethora of information and data that we have. Of course, I think this step is, necessary. Perhaps, it should have been done since, a while ago, because, we cannot fail to recognize that the designation of cannabis as a poison perhaps had its own, colonial type of oppressive intent. We recognize that designating it as a poison would also be quite discriminatory to our local religious institutions or movements here, particularly our Rastafarian movements. And so even for that, especially, we want to be able to remove that level of discrimination that would have come out of a very colonially oppressive agenda. And so I would want to, with all of that brief intervention and submission, second the movement of this medical amendment bill and wish it safe passage in this honorable house today. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Senator Phillip. Any other presentation? I recognize the Honorable Member for Nevis 9.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise very briefly to lend my support to this very minor amendment, but which has, of course, major implications. I would want to agree with the mover that the designation of this in the Medical Act as a poison, that language is arguably now obsolete and so ought to be expunged. And so there's no argument there for me. I feel, however, that we are on a particular path now in the country, and it behooves government and opposition alike, public commentators and others, to really determine what we're going to do in St.Kitts and Nevis in relation to cannabis. It is important. I feel, and I've said so when I was in government, and even I've said so now that I'm in opposition, that we have been nibbling at the edges of this issue for a long time. We have come from time to time and done a sort of piecemeal. I commented to somebody just now, Madam Deputy Speaker, that even as a parliamentarian, I am sometimes unsure of what is in relation to cannabis. If you were to ask why I say that, is because we have done so many little amendments. We keep coming in here and we have a little 2 lines touch and a little paragraph touch, and because I feel that there is no national consensus as yet as to where we're going to go with cannabis. I sat here and I listened to the early debate. I didn't rise on that. But the picture that is being painted from the government benches is that this is a major industry. The Minister of Agriculture, the member for number 4, was quite eloquent in saying that this is moving. And in fact, I heard him and I made a note that he said that this could almost be, if you will, a replacement, or certainly in addition to our citizenship by investment program as a money earner. All of it sounds wonderful, but I'm not quite sure that we have as a nation decided where we want to be. Cannabis, we know, has recreational use. Some people love to smoke ganja, make them feel good. Cannabis has a medicinal use. We have focused a lot of our attention in this house on the medicinal aspects. Cannabis has religious use, that is for our Rastafarian brothers and sisters. I feel sometimes it seems that we are not quite sure where we want to position ourselves. And for good reason. So I'm not standing here trying to minimize the concern, because certainly I appreciate that there are others out there who are not like-minded. There are other countries, in fact, major countries in our hemisphere, who still criminalize cannabis. And so we have to be cautious, if you will. But I think that what we need is a clear path, that even if we're not there yet, we lay out a clear path in terms of where we want to be. My preference is really to legalize cannabis at this stage. What really is the point of holding on to a lot of these anachronistic provisions? Legalize, tax, regulate. I would remind the Kiddush and Nevis public, there was a time, I believe it was referred to as the Prohibition era in the United States, when alcohol was illegal. In fact, I hope I don't get myself in trouble, but they say that that is where the Kennedys made their money. Because by making it illegal, you created an entire criminal enterprise around alcohol. So they developed this process of bootlegging. And what was interesting is I'm told that alcohol is not illegal in Canada. So they used to run alcohol from Canada, smuggle it into the United States, at what they used to call the speakeasies, which were the bars that were hidden away in basements and places like those. And people like Joe Kennedy, the father of famous President Kennedy, they, it is alleged, made their money in that Prohibition era. Criminal enterprise. It shows that when we legislate sometimes, for whatever reasons, there may be moral reasons, there may be religious reasons, perhaps there may be medical reasons. But when we legislate sometimes, the unintended consequences. Because one thing I've learned in my short sojourn here on earth, you can't legislate human behavior. You can try, but at the end of the day, people will be people. So if a man wants rum, whether it's illegal or not, he can find rum. And he'll find somebody who's going to make a profit supplying him with the rum. And in fact, I think history would have shown that the illegal rum will be more expensive than the legal rum, because you don't have to compensate the man for the risks associated with getting that illegal product into his hands. So a lot of people right now, they're at, what's it called, 1840 and other places, because we at some point in our history, I say we, I mean the collective we, not this parliament, but we at some point in our history would have decided that cannabis was bad, it was a drug, it was a poison, it was illegal, and so people were hounded, locked up, prosecuted, harassed, lost their property, lost their freedom, all of that over this. I think that what we need is a wholesale reckoning, if you will, a wholesale conversation with the people of St.Kitts and Nevis. The good senator opposite mentioned something. She said that some people may not like, I'm paraphrasing, but what I got from what she said, some people may not like what we're doing in here today, and I think she's right. There are some members of our population who do not at all like the idea of any change to the law in relation to this bad weed, this thing that drives people crazy. Man, growing up as a youngster in Nevis, I couldn't even go home smelling of it. So I used to avoid fellas who smoking it, because if I go home smelling of it, notwithstanding I may not have smoked any, I was in trouble. Because the suggestion certainly was that there was something that was so wrong about this. I'm not saying anything that all of us don't know. We ostracize people in the society and have done so for decades. People who smoke, people who grow their locks, people who smell a weed, we call them weed head, we call them all kind of thing. The reality is that not everybody is going to agree, but we need to come to some kind of consensus and determine where is the country going to go. If it is not possible to get there in this year or next, then do we have a 3-year or 5-year program to say, listen, this is where we're moving to? Because you see, it's one thing to come in here and talk about ganja, sensimilia, marijuana, weed, herb, whatever you want to call it. But I feel, and I've always said, that you cannot, on the one hand, seek to legislate to free up and allow greater use of this substance without at the same time coupling that with a widespread education campaign, particularly for our young people. We have already a situation in this country where, based on the reports coming out of our schools, a lot of youngsters are using cannabis. Whether they're ready for it, whether their minds are developed enough to handle it, there is so much misinformation and lack of proper information out there that one really doesn't even know. And so I think that we need to get the experts in. We need to go into the town halls, we need to go into the byways and highways, and we need to have a real conversation with the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, and to, in a way, gauge the temperature, test where they are. I've stated my preference, but I'm a public servant. I respond to what the people tell me. When you represent people, you have to listen to them. And so I am curious to know what the temperature of the people is on this. Because I believe, in speaking to my constituents certainly, that the majority of people see any kind of loosening of the law in relation to ganja, in relation to cannabis, as primarily recreational. What I mean by that is that a lot of people use it for however it is it makes them feel. It's not medicinal because they don't have any medical issue. It's not religious because they're not Rasta. They use it because it gives them a high. Just like somebody would drink a beer or drink something because it's a social thing that they do. And so I think that when we come into the parliament and we talk a lot about medicinal industry, I sometimes ask myself, who are we talking to? Because I'm assured that if you were to take a walk now on 4th Street, the average youngster on 4th Street is not interested in ganja for any medicinal purpose. He or she wants that feel-good factor that you get from it. That's what he or she wants. And that I've heard that one gets when one imbibes marijuana. So I want to, while commending the effort and supporting the effort, I want us to really have a plan. That perhaps is the point that I'm trying to get to. And for us to decide. Because if we're going to go the whole gamut and say, you know what, legalize the thing, regulate it, tax it, we then have to now have the infrastructure in place. The education. The good Minister for Education spoke earlier, member for number 1, said all that he's doing the laptops and all of that. Maybe those same laptops could have had some health tips on how you deal with ganja, how you deal with cannabis. I'm saying that we need to get out there, we need to get into our schools, and it would be wrong of us to assume that our young people are not using. Even the primary schools, we're getting reports, certainly at Nevis, that people as young as primary school students are indulging. The implications for undeveloped brains at that point, we don't know. What is the science telling us? We don't know. I say all that to say that whilst I agree wholeheartedly that this can be the billion-dollar industry that we've been talking about for some time, every decision in life, as with everything else, comes with some good, some bad. And we have to ensure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when we speak in this parliament and when we move in a particular direction, we can give accurate information to our public, to our youth, to our people, in terms of saying, this is what we want to do. These are the potential pitfalls. This is how we propose to deal with those pitfalls. And I think that we have to, as part of that, have a dose of reality in relation to what is actually happening out there already in our schools, in our communities, and see what's happening. We walk through our towns now. Which of us can walk through any main areas in our towns, whether in Bastille or Charlestown, on an afternoon and don't smell? ganja. And since we came in here and tinkered with it under the former administration, and we tell people about 5 trees and all kind of things we tell people, nobody seems to know. Police telling you they don't know what to do. Individuals calling me, say police come by them, root up the trees, and they had 6 trees, the police should only root up 1 and leave 5. Wait, there's a certain, and then what started to happen, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the youngsters will sit down on 4th Street and sit down in Charleston and Main Street and just build a spliff and smoke a spliff right there. I've said it in this house before that an elderly lady, a businesswoman, reached out to me and said, she can't even keep the windows open anymore because fellas outside the window smoking. The poor lady getting high on the inside from secondhand smoke. So we have to determine, and in some respects, I feel that maybe the Parliament has not kept peace with the public. That the appetite in the public for smoking, for consuming this plant has outstripped our own efforts in the Parliament. And so, again, I don't want it to be seen that I'm detracting, but I feel that we need a far more comprehensive approach. And we need to make a determination as to where St. Kitts and Nevis is going to be. Where are we going to be in 2025 on this issue? Where are we going to be? And if we're going to free it up, as I said, we need to know. The AG needs to see and look and say what will be the implications for the banking sector. When the man come and try to open an account at National Bank and they ask him, where's your income coming from? He said, a ganja farmer. What is that going to mean? When if we generate hundreds of millions, as we are hearing, and that money starts to flow into our banking sector, what are the correspondent banks based in New York going to say? These are not unimportant questions. But we need to have that kind of open dialogue with the public so that people understand that it's not just about smoking a spliff, selling a spliff. It's not just about growing some ganja. That there are real serious implications for what we do. For those, for example, and this is my final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those who already have latent mental issues, I'm no doctor, but I have looked at some research that suggests that the impact of cannabis, the strain, the potency, how it's consumed, all of these are factors that can then impact people differently. Put differently, the Honorable Prime Minister and I can imbibe same cannabis, but it affects him differently to the way it affects me. If, for example, somebody is a first-time user, whereas somebody else is accustomed to using, the impact on that person who's accustomed might be different. So with all of these things, we need to have that level of conversation in a very open way. I get the impression sometimes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that those who are defending, meaning they want the thing free up, they say everything about it is good. And then you have those who say you're going to turn you crazy, you're going to do all of these bad things. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere more in the middle of those two extreme positions. And I feel that we need to have that conversation, and I really would like to be part of a parliament where we can say that we had a plan and we had timelines, we had deadlines, and we worked according to that plan. Rather than, as I've said, the piecemeal approach that I think we're currently taking. Having said that, I feel that this is a bill that should be supported, as indeed the previous bill was, and that we should take this as an opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to use a word from the Honourable Member for number 8, to reset in relation to ganja, that we look at it carefully. It could be a critical industry. Let's face it, citizenship by investment is under pressure. And that has been our bread and butter for a long time in the country. So we now need to start to think about alternatives. Maybe the word alternative is not appropriate. We need to start to think about additional streams of revenue. So even as we try to protect what we have, we are also looking ahead to new streams. And I believe ganja is one of those streams. Cannabis is one of those streams. But we must do it with widespread consultation, widespread buying. Not everybody's going to agree.
We have been saying that for years
I think
now,
just
bro.
like alcohol and prohibition,
we've been saying
those
that for
days are
years.
over. That
Yeah, like
whatever value there was in
just
that
wake up.
period is past. And we really now need to decriminalize, take the criminality out of it, and treat it, for all intents and purposes, as just any other product.
CARICOM said
Natural
that
as
was
we
the
hear you put it,
recommendations
safe
of
it goes.
CARICOM.
Natural. This is not cocaine or something that is going through some lab to be created. Methamphetamine or whatever they call these things. This is a natural substance that grows naturally. So how do we treat it? How do we deal with it? And above all, I end by saying we need to ensure that we saturate the place, particularly our schools, with education about the pros and cons, the uses, etc. of this. Because it is not going to be easy for us, Madam Deputy Speaker, simply to open the gates and leave it as such. We have to open the gates, and as we open the gates, we educate our people, young and old alike, about the implications of this new industry. But I feel that we must move in that direction with some level of alacrity. We've been talking about it now for a decade. We've been talking about it for a decade. It is time we move with some level of alacrity. I hear the Minister of Tourism saying that we're getting almost 1 million cruise visitors this year. Imagine how much ganja they would buy if they could. Imagine how much edibles they could have buy if they could. Yeah, I know you like it. So the truth is we need to create the ecosystem to allow it. That's where we talk about value added. That's some of the value added that we need to create.
Yo.
But we're tentative, and as I said, there are good reasons to be tentative. But we need to sometimes take
know how to talk when it's
in order
convenient.
to ensure that we can get the benefits. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Nevis 9. I recognize the Honourable Member for St. Okay, we'll have a switch for the interpret. I recognize the move of the bill, Honourable Member for St. Christopher 8, to do his wrap up.
Madam Speaker, with your leave, I rise to wind up this bill shortly entitled the Medical Amendment Bill 2023. But I also recognize that the member for number 9 would have made some significant points with respect to cannabis, as I call it, and here in St.Kitts and Nevis. Of course, this whole issue of cannabis and its decriminalization, medicinal use, and legalization is a complex matter. It is not only a complex matter for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but it's a complex matter regionally and even internationally. And within the framework of the legal structure, that in itself has its own difficulties, so to speak. So, Madam Speaker, if you look at the United States, for example, it has a particular schedule. I think it's Schedule 4, which means that it cannot be legalized. However, there are states within the United States that have it, if not legalized totally, at least decriminalized and can be used for medicinal purposes. In Canada, for example, they have freed it up to the point of also being, to a certain extent, legal for use for recreational purposes. And if you go to parts of Western Europe and so forth, you will also find that. And I think the point was mentioned, and it's clearly, and it has to be recognized clearly, that this can have consequences based on how far you go. So sometimes you know that if you were to take an action, this will be the reaction, which at this point in time can have a significant detrimental impact on our country, our economy, and certain sectors, such as the banking sector, for example. And therefore, even though you understand where you are heading, you also understand that you are working within a framework, an international framework, and so you want to be very mindful of that as well. And so that is being taken into account and be taken into account considerably. And so, Madam Speaker, what we do see here is the complexity of really all these fetters that have been holding back this industry for many years. Sometimes you have to take one fetter at a time, until you can really get it totally free. But we are going through that process step by step, getting our people accustomed, respecting international laws, making sure that we are best positioned. So we are taking all those things, Madam Speaker, into consideration. The other matter that I would like to say is the point with respect to the education part of it. And that part too is also critical. And I would say that our department that deals with drug use, that we have expanded that. We have expanded thus far, and we have had several workshops when it comes to that. We have also reintroduced into the schools in St. Kitts what you call the MAGIC program. The MAGIC program is a program that educates young people about many different things, avoiding gangs, violence, substance abuse, and all these things. So in a sense, we have restarted to some extent the re-education or the education of our people when it comes to all of these things. So I take that point that education has to be a foundational aspect of what the changes that we are seeking at this particular point. And so that too is also part and parcel of what has to be done. Now, with respect to where we are at, because there are certain aspects of it which one has to consider when it comes to the spiritual aspect that is dear to a great number of people. When it comes to the medicinal aspect, you will be surprised, Madam Speaker, when I was a practicing physician. The people who would come into my office and ask me, well, Doc, can't you prescribe some of this for me? I am speaking about persons who you would not suspect would ask for this. But they ask for it because they recognize that this is a natural substance. It sometimes has, and most times, it can have less effects, or what you call side effects, than the regular medicine that you would buy in a store. And they recognize that when we did the surveys on this, we know that the surveys are showing that when it comes to the medicinal part, a great part of our adult population is saying that this should at least be used for medicinal purposes. And so when you see our people would have watched series such as weed and so forth and understand that this is being used for this, they understand that as well. And so I want to give our people credit for understanding this issue. And as was mentioned, even more than the legislature would acknowledge through making sure that the necessary legislative work would be in place so that we can remove all of the fetters that are holding back this industry. And that is very, very, very critical. And that is the reason why I mentioned that, because our people understand herbs and how they can be used for medicinal purposes. So they are not without knowledge at all. They understand. But when it comes to the use by youths, and that is why it is critical that the message cannot be sent to youths that it's okay for them to use this as they like. And if you look at the legislative framework, it says also, and would have in it, we have to protect our young people. Just like we have to protect them, we have to protect our young people. And I would say that this has more positive than negative. But if used in the wrong way, it can have effects that you hope you would not see. That I can say, Madam Speaker. However, the overall picture is, and where the world is shifting to. Let me say this again. Errors we made when it comes to us being producers of anything, this and alcohol. We used to have people who used to go to the mountains to do moonshine and the Hammond. And they say, Nevis are some good Hammond. These men and women, the best. Yeah, the best.
And you're joking with it. You hear them? And people life.
Madam
You know,
Speaker,
people
but
got you.
these
The kind of thing
men
that people
and
got you
women
for these
used
things.
to be master chemists. We have to recognize them as chemists. And as being said here, indigenous knowledge. And instead of us holding them up for their knowledge, look at what we did to them. We locked them up. We chased them out the mountain. They could not even pass on effectively the chemistry behind making some alcohol from molasses, for example. Yet in France, in Champagne, where is Champagne located? France. Sparkling white wine. You can't call anything else champagne. You have to call it all sorts of other names. Sparkling white wine, all sorts of names. Because the people in Champagne, France, mastered the art of how to do that. And what France did, they encouraged it. And today, the only place in the world that you can get champagne is from Champagne. But what did we do in the Caribbean? We harass our people, lock them up, do them all sorts of things. Are we not learning from history? Right now, I can say that St. Kitts already consuming the substances found in cannabis, THCs and cannabinoids in different forms. The whole world is rushing us. And in a short order, it will become accessible to all. And where we will be? We will be left as consumers and not producers. We can't make that mistake again. We should not make that mistake again. That is why I say we need our master growers. And that is why we are forming the authority and having so many people added. Why are we doing that? Because the government alone does not have all of the requisite knowledge that would be required to develop this industry. The private people, our citizens should be involved. And the authority will also be responsible to make sure that it educates the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. So you have to make sure that this is established so that when they put the entire framework together, that we can see that education has to be a fundamental part of it as well. And that is why we want to widen it, include people from both St. Kitts and Nevis, different experts, including those who can teach us how to educate people properly when it comes to this, Madam Speaker. So that is why this bill is so critically important. Because again, if I go back to the other bill where we're making the amendment, we want to expand the board so that the board can be of such composition to include those who can really look at all the different aspects, including the education of our people, Madam Speaker. And so that is part and parcel of what we are trying to do here. But the point was made that a comprehensive look needed. We have looked at it comprehensively. As I've said, there's fetters here and there that limits you. In this particular moment, maybe in a year or two, those will be removed. But one thing I want to say to our people is that we must make sure that we are on the line so that we can also benefit significantly from this industry. But the message must never be sent. And that is why in the last part, when I opened up this debate and had this be read for the second time, I spoke about youth and the youth among youth. We have to make sure that the youth, our school children, don't have access to this willy-nilly and can use this willy-nilly. That should not be. And that is why we need programs like MAGIC. That is why we need to really expand our drug use department, which we have thus far. That is why we need psychologists in school, which we are expanding as well, to make sure that we do this responsibly. Sometimes, when you're doing something responsibly, you take baby steps. Sometimes a giant step, sometimes if you take too big a step, you fall in a pit. You fall. It's just like a child, if you eat too much meat one time, your system ain't ready to digest it, you choke yourself. So sometimes you have to take it incrementally, bit by bit, until you get exactly where you want to be. Taking into account other factors arranged in our law. And so that has to be part and parcel of how you're going to roll this out little by little as you go forward. And so, Madam Speaker, that is why we are here today. Education must be a part of it, but we have to get the authority in place so the authority can start setting down for us and helping to really put forward the framework of how we're going to fundamentally introduce this. As a matter of fact, because the authority is not fully established yet and is being established, that is why a lot of what is to come forward has not come forward as yet. Because now we are getting this right, now we are getting it with the proper ministry, then they would allow the framework with which will really help to determine the direction that we go with this. So, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker, all these things have to be taken into account. The religious aspect of it, the medicinal aspect of it, the regional laws that can influence this, the education of our people, keeping it out of the hands of our youths, making sure that we have framework in place to treat people. And if we do it right, we can, of course, have more benefits than what some might perceive as the negatives. Because one of the things that always strike me, Madam Speaker, is that we speak of Western Europe and we like to say, okay, Western Europe is advancing this and that and all sorts of things. And you go to Western Europe and you would even find that they're giving needles to their citizens. Needles, so that they can inject themselves with different types of drugs. And we consider them some of the most advanced society. And when you actually do these studies, they have some of the lowest incidence of drug use within their societies. Again, really showing that having some access to it and the possibility of using it, that's something that don't go together. Because there are other factors that are, of course, involved to determine how persons get involved. And what they have recognized, Madam Speaker, is that when they take away the stigma and when they take away this sense of aura that you are using a type of illegal substance, that in itself can have an impact where you demystify it and therefore people are not gravitating to it as you think they should. And again, Madam Speaker, we might think that having it available might just lead to increased use. Again, that may not be the case. When it comes to mental illness, there are some studies that might show, Madam Speaker, that if you are prone to a particular mental illness and you use it, that it might, in a sense, remove the mask and allow whatever is on the line to come forward. Quite interesting. However, alcohol itself can give you mental illness even if you were not prone to it. So that is how much worse alcohol is than the substance. Sometimes, let me tell you what happened in alcohol, how they break up marriages, Madam Speaker. Let me tell you how they break up. Deputy Speaker, when you see a man drinking a lot, right? And sometimes you pass and you hear the argument by the rum shop. Oh, he's a real man and all kind of things. And sometimes I hear smiling to myself because I know if you're drinking that much alcohol, the man that you claim to be in whatever department you claim to be in is not so. It's not so. Right? It's not so. Did you hear them arguing? But Madam Speaker, what happens is that it leads to impotence. And it leads to something called paranoia. So they go home and their partner or the wife they think is having extra or outside relations or relations outside of the relationship, whether it is marriage or common law marriage or whatever the situation of the relationship is. They're really paranoid, not just thinking it. And that paranoia a lot of times leads to beating. Serious beating. You ever see an alcoholic it's hard to see an alcoholic man in a relationship who is not beating. You're either beating the wife or you're beating the children. A lot of beating. A lot kind of beating. Madam Speaker, you hear that? And that happens again because they develop these psychiatric illnesses as a result of the use of alcohol. Good thing you don't drink. What what I'm saying simply is that we have had exposure to substances that we take so normal that are so worse than cannabis. And this is part of the education that must be had and we must have. And so when I see youth exposed to alcohol, I become. Madam Speaker, alcohol is a serious problem in St. Kitts and Nevis, and we're not talking about it. Alcohol causes more deaths in St. Kitts and Nevis than cannabis will ever cause. And maybe I should use this moment to give some education as well. Alcohol causes more deaths than cannabis.
There is no claim that cannabis
causes more illnesses, both physical and mental, than cannabis. Alcohol does that. And yet, alcohol is part of, our social life. You go to a party, you have to have a drink. Well, except the Minister of Works, member for number 3. Can't even get him sip of wine in a toast. I don't drink. But maybe he's right. Because alcohol is a poison. If you want to classify something as a poison, alcohol can be classified as a poison. There is no medicinal benefits to alcohol, none, absolutely. Not even the red wine that they used to try to force on us. You know what the red wine producers used to say? This has in good antioxidants and help to prevent heart disease and so forth. From the grapes. You get it from the grapes, Madam Speaker. All sorts of things they used to fool us in. That's how they kill the worms. Oh, Madam Speaker, the bottom line is no medicinal benefits. Absolutely none. None. So sometimes they say, boy, take a shot, the shot, do this and the shot do that. But all studies now have shown that even a little bit of alcohol can be bad. So alcohol is really a poison in itself. And that is accepted as normal. And then you have something like cannabis that is not a poison, that might cause some psychiatric illness.
Might cause.
I can tell you if you develop psychiatric issues. But if you use cannabis, there is no study that shows you must develop any
psychiatric
issues.
Yes.
That's the difference. And so I'm saying that this, compared to something like alcohol, pales in its threat to a lot of things. Even when it comes to drunk driving, let's say you smoke and you get high, and you are prone to maybe getting an accident. Everybody knows that drunk, you drink and you drive, or you drink alcohol and you drive. That is the highest risk of getting in an accident. Something you hear accident here, twice to know. Men in and the beer next to them. Because a lot of people are functional alcoholics. They don't even know they're alcoholics. Because they walk and say, well, let's go down there and drink 2 beers. And they drink 2 beers today, 3 tomorrow, 4, and they're drinking daily. But they're functional because they do other things, but they're really alcoholics. And that is leading to high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, all neurological diseases, all sort of other complications. All sort of cancers are linked to alcohol. And I'm yet to see a cancer linked, talking of it, that is separate and apart to the substance itself. Because not everybody who smokes it. Again, cannabis pales when it comes to alcohol
and the other substances, even tobacco,
having deleterious effects on one's both mental health and physical health. And social as well, Madam Speaker. No work for me, he's drinking. And then again, the money he uses to buy the alcohol, or she uses to buy the alcohol, that is having significant negative effects on our people and our culture. And we still continue to underestimate the alcohol and its negative effects on our culture. So the point I'm trying to bring out here, Madam Speaker, is that one, religiously, it should be gone. That should not be discussion. People should be able to practice. Medicinal-wise, everybody knows herbs in St. Kitts and Nevis. When you get cold, everybody offer you a bush. Trust me, even me, If I go in my office and you have the sniffles, my patients used to tell me which brush to drink because everybody in St. Kitts knows. But when it comes to the recreational, that is where we are saying we have to draw the line. It's in the hands of our youth, and our youths think they can do as they like with it.
The same need to be
wrong
applied to
institution.
alcohol and tobacco,
the
and that's why
message
you
that
need to
we want to
have IDs and make the youth move with IDs like they do in America and other places. So in order to get certain substances, like here in America, you show your ID.
And incremental steps until we get there. But those points are noted, Madam Speaker. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would really like to close out the debate and wish the bill safe passage. Please.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for sticking with Stiffer 8. The question is that the bill entitled Medical Amendment Bill 2023 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Medical Act, Cap 9.15, otherwise known as the Medical Amendment Bill 2023.
The bill has been read a second time. House moves into committee stage. Proceed.
Clauses 1, 2, and 3.
The question is that clauses 1, 2, and 3 stand part of the bill.
Yeah, well, people, I will have to make an exodus from here as I have to go and take care of the roadside stall. At this point, I guess, the deliberations will continue and they're going to be, I'm hoping.
So the question is that clause 1, 2, and 3 stand part of the bill. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
I'm not sure if they're
The
going to have the
enacting
third.
clause?
The question is that the enacting clause stand part of the bill. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have
I don't
it.
know if they're going to have a third reading.
The title.
The question is that the title stand part of the bill.
And then
Those in
eventually
favor?
gazette the bill.
Those against? The ayes have it. House resumes.
Okay, so I don't know if they're going to have the third reading. But if so, I really wish it a
I
safe
recognize
passage.
the mover, Honorable Member St. Christopher 8.
Madam Speaker, with your leave, I rise to report that the bill has passed through the committee stage without changes or amendments. Therefore, I ask that the bill be read a third time and pass into law.
Seconder,
Madam Speaker, I second that motion.
the question is that the bill entitled Medical Amendment Bill 2023 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Okay,
A bill to amend the Medical Act, Cap 9.15, otherwise known as the Medical Amendment Bill 2023.
So basically that's about it. We will be back again and probably discuss this because I basically would have to go back to hearing the earlier the presentations prior to when we started, because as I started, I met things going, so I would have to listen to it in its entirety and get back and probably get an opportunity for us to have an open debate and discussion and so on. And this probably, maybe we'll set it up in a way that they could allow callers to be a part of it and call in and weigh in on their views and opinions and so on the topic. Or maybe I have somebody who I can interview. But yeah, we will be back with you. Thank you for taking your time out. This was a very vital bit of information and historical point in the history of St. Kitts and Nevis, where cannabis is concerned. And I just couldn't miss the opportunity to share it. We are just about an hour right now. Thank you again. We'll be back and I will be open for further discussion on this topic.